All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back for the last session of the Data Reuse Days for today. So I'm welcoming Lucas, who you already heard earlier if you were following the Wikidata query service introduction, for example, who's going to show us how to build a tool, a simple web app using Wikidata from scratch. So I hope that you're ready. The session is, as I said, it's the last of the day, and it's gonna last as long as Lucas has something to code, which could be all night or maybe not. And if I don't see you again after, I will see you very soon tomorrow for the upcoming sessions. Here you go, Lucas.
All right, thanks a lot. I hope you can all hear me well, and I hope that the screen sharing in a second is also going to work. This entire screen. Oh, now you can't see my webcam anymore, right? That's how Jitsi works?
Yep, it's one or the other.
Ah, okay. All right.
But we can see your screen.
Yeah, all right, that's great. What I thought, I did this a bit too early. I still want to talk a bit, but what I thought I would do to build a very simple web app was maybe a browser for XKCD comics, because we have some interesting metadata on those on Wikidata. So if I go search for the car problems comic, for instance, then we can see the comic itself somewhere down here, full work available at. And I'll just let you read this for a second so you don't get distracted for the rest of the hour by trying to read it, and I switch away from it all the time. Okay, so in this comic we have 4 different characters. We have Megan, Cue Ball, Black Hat, and Danish. That's the name, or at least that's the fan name, I guess. And we actually have this information in Wikidata as well. If we scroll up a bit, we can see that this comic depicts Cue Ball, Megan, Black Hat, and Danish. And then it has some other metadata as well. And I thought it would be interesting and not too difficult within 1 hour to build a small web app which shows you which characters are in an XKCD comic or which other comics a character appears in. So that's going to be our example. And I'm going to build this in Python, but most of what I'm showing should work more or less similar in other programming languages as well. And I should also mention this thing that was demoed a few hours ago, in which I've embarrassingly forgotten the name of, something WDX or WDZ. What was it called? This really impressive thing.
Which bit?
Yeah, that one. Was it this? Nope. Wikidata.org. Right, I need to enable JavaScript, sorry. Yeah, that looked basically like a much easier way of doing what I'm doing now. But I'm still going to show how I would do this thing, and maybe we can still learn something from that. But I just wanted to mention this because it also looked great. And so I've started here creating a project, but it's just totally empty, just a Git repository and a license. And I'm going to be writing this in Python, as I said, using the Flask framework, which is a nice little framework. So I'm going to create a requirements file where I write I will be using Flask. And then I create a virtual environment here so I can install the dependencies, and I'm sure that they all exist and I don't need to install them in the whole system. And this should only take a moment, maybe a bit more than 1 moment, unfortunately. Okay. So I've set up the virtual environment. I'm upgrading pip just in case, always a good idea. Doesn't look, oh no, there is something to upgrade, okay. And then I want to, once this is done, install the dependencies that I just wrote. So so far we're only using Flask, install these requirements. And now I have that, and I will create an extremely simple app. Import Flask, app flask.flask with this name, and I will give it a single root for now. The index page, return hello world. And then I want to run this. I need to activate the venv here as well, and then I can run Flask run in the env development, and then I should be able to open this in the browser, and we see hello world. Let me zoom in a little bit. So far that's nothing specific to Wikidata. That's just hopefully not too hard to follow even if you don't if you're not used to Python. And I'm going to create oops, not in this terminal, in this one, a directory with templates. And in templates, I'm going to put an index HTML with some absolutely terrible HTML title, and let's call that the Wikidata XKCD browser. And we have a body with a heading, Wikidata XKCD browser. And then in the template here, I want to return render template index.html. And then we see this extremely rudimentary HTML that I just wrote without any bootstrap or anything. And just to demonstrate how Flask works, I can put here my var equals my variable. And then in the template, I can put something like this, or my var is this, and then I can reload that. And that's how we get data from the Python code into this template with these double braces. And yeah, Flask is really great. Actually, I'll just show off immediately one even better feature, which is, let's just say a equals 1, b equals 2, and assert a equals b. There we go. There's the assertion error, and Flask gives you, if you ran it in this development mode, it gives you an in-browser debugger where I can click. Oh, of course, I need to enable JavaScript. Sorry. I can click this button, and after entering the pin that it just printed, I can look at this in the browser and see what happened there, and I can write the Python in here, and that's really, really useful sometimes. I don't know exactly how on earth this works, that I have all these variables available locally in the in-browser debugger, but it's really cool. Yes, I am recording this locally, and assuming that nothing goes wrong, I'll hopefully publish this recording. So if you don't want your voice to be published, then maybe don't talk in Jitsi, or if you do, then I'll have to get back to you and ask you if you want your voice edited out or something. So yeah, I will try to publish the recording if I can. All right, so this is Flask, and I wanted to start by actually getting some data from XKCD first. So if we add info.0.json to any comic URL, we can see this data that it sends back, some metadata about each comic with a title, the image URL. And to get that from Python, we will use the requests library. So just add that to the requirements. requests. Install it just in case. Oh, it was not already installed. I thought it would be. Okay. So now we have requests, and we will create a quick session there. Request session session and headers, update the headers with this dictionary. So that's apparently the request's way to set default headers. Except we would like application JSON, and we'll also set a user agent, and we'll call this wd_xkcd at Werkmeister.de, and let's use a GitHub variable as well, URL I mean. And remove all of this again. And instead we can, for now let's just hardcode something. Requests session get this URL here, info, and then we return the info instead of returning the template. And then we can see that here in the browser, hopefully. Nope. Oh, I think I need to add .json here at the end. Right. Okay. And so now I'm seeing the exact same JSON again. And I can get some information out of it, such as the, let's get the title and the image maybe as well. And then we will render this into, well, maybe not the index template. Let's maybe put this somewhere else actually. We can create another route with, let's say, comic. I don't remember. It's either int id or id::int. I don't remember the order. We'll call this comic, and it gets the ID as an argument, and we return Flask render template with, well, we'll use all of this. And in here we can put the ID now as a formatted string. Title, image equals image. And then we, let's copy the template index to templates comic and say that we want to put here the title. And here we put only the title, and then an image source equals image. And now if we update the URL to /comic/1014, so the pattern that we use down here, we should hopefully see the comic. There it is. Yeah, the JSON with transcription, unfortunately, at some point, Randall stopped providing transcription. So I think at 2000, yeah, the transcript is just empty. Yeah, but the earlier comics have official transcripts, and then later you only have to go to explain XKCD, which is a shame. But yeah, we have the comic title, we have the image, and of course what we are missing and what you should add is the alt text. So let's add that as well. For alt, actually let's simplify this. Let's just pass in the whole info. And then in the template we use info.title, info.title, info.image, title, info.alt. And don't forget to wrap this in braces. And now if I hover with my mouse over it, I can see the title text or alt text or whatever you want to call it as well. So that's now a very basic XKCD viewer, I guess. I also noticed that there's a title and a save title here. I haven't looked into what the difference between them is. Let's leave that for later, I guess. I think this is good enough for a first commit, definitely. I should remove this stuff. Yeah, so let's add a git ignore with pycache directories and a venv, and then git add all the stuff and commit. Initial code just shows XKCD comic, nothing else. And I'll push this, and if you want, you can look at the code already. I'll just put this link in here. And so I started getting some data from XKCD like that, because now I want to transition into getting a bit of extra data from Wikidata in exactly the same way. And then we'll replace that and use the API instead. But I thought it would be interesting to see it done without the API first, and then you can decide for yourself what you like better. So we'll change this slightly, and instead of putting in there the integer ID of the comic on XKCD, we want to put the item ID of car problems. So we want the URL to look more like this. And right now that's an error because we've said that this has to be an ID, an integer. And we can put the Q here and then say that the item ID is actually Q followed by the ID. And then let's just return the item ID briefly just to see that it's working. Yep, there it is. And now we want to get the Wikidata data of that, and we can do that fairly similarly to this by getting request session get wikidata.org/entity/item ID and call that the .json again at the end, and call that the item response. And if we return the item response, then we should see a bunch of JSON for the Wikidata item. Yeah, there it is. We can collapse all of this stuff. And we see that the actual item is nested beneath entities and then the item IDs. So let's get the item is the item response, entities, item ID. And now we see the same data, but without these extra wrapping layers. And if we want the previous functionality back, then we need first of all the comic number, and that is stored in here as, let's search for 1014. There's the full work available at URL, or there's the issue number, or it's also in the series ordinal down here, but I think the issue is actually going to be the easiest version, so that's property P433. So let's look through this a little bit. If we look through the claims, we can see P433, there it is. And buried deeply in it is this number 1014, so let's get that out. It's in claims. Item claims P433. The first of those, main snack, data value, and then the value. And let's make that an int as well. That's not, I don't think it's necessary. And then we can do this same thing again down here, except we exchange the ID for the issue. And now we should see the same XKCD comic again. Yep, there it is. We've just gotten the number of the comic from Wikidata and nothing else. So let's commit that. Get comic number from Wikidata. And the next step, I guess, would be to actually, I don't remember what I want to do next. Either show the items that are depicted or switch to the API first. I think I want to go to the API first. Yeah. So here we're using the linked data interface. If you were at the session earlier about the different ways to access the data, I'm using the linked data interface with just the /entity URL actually, and because we say that we want JSON back, this automatically redirects us to /wiki/special entity data /item ID .json. It's the same thing. But instead of this, we could also use the action API, and that will let us specify that we're only really interested in the statements and not in all of these aliases, for instance, that we saw. So let's do that. For that, we can use a little library called MWAPI. Let's install that. There it is. And import MWAPI. And we already have the request session here. Let's put the user agent into a variable. And make a new variable for the API session, which is an MWAPI.session wikidata.org with user agent equals user agent. And then instead of this, we can say the API response. Actually, we can still call it the item response, I guess. Item response equals API session. Get action is wget entities. IDs is this list of the item ID. And for now, this should work already, I think. Let's check. Yeah. So we get the same data back. It even has the same top level entities and then item ID key in the response. So if we just return item response for a second, then we see, yeah, it's an API response, so it has this extra success one boolean in it, but otherwise it looks exactly the same. We get the same data back. So I think we can commit this already. Yeah, start using MWAPI. And one thing we can do if we look at the API sandbox and see which parameters this wget entities API takes, we used IDs for now, but there's also a props parameter which controls how much information is returned, and we can actually say we would like to have the claims, so the statements, and nothing else of this item. Oops. And then we get just the statements, and we skip whatever site links it had and any labels and aliases and all that other stuff because we don't need it. So let's put that in here. Props equals claims. And I'm putting it as a list here because in theory it could have multiple values in here, even though I'm actually only using a single value. And now it should still work just the same way. But yeah, we are getting less data from the API, so it should be just a tiny little bit faster, hopefully. Let's commit that. Oh, and I forgot to push the previous one. Only get claims from the API. There we go. And now what we can also do is start showing all the different characters that are featured in this comic, which we could see here as a depict statement. And if we just go back to the full JSON of this item for a second, then we can see P180. It has all of these statements with their IDs. So let's get those. Let's add some line breaks as well. So depicted item IDs is an empty list. For statement in item claims, get P180 and fall back to the empty list if that doesn't exist, if it doesn't have any depict statements. Then So now we'll have one of these statements, and we add depicted item IDs append statement main snack. Oops. Data value, just like up here, but then after the value, we need to add this ID key here as well. And I mean, let's put that into a separate variable maybe. Depicted item ID, like this. And we can pass that through into our template and say that in the template we want to have heading characters, where we add an unordered list because they're not really in any particular order, where for depicted item ID in depicted item IDs, we generate a list item with, for now, just the depicted item ID itself. And now we should see that appear down here. There we go. Just checking if I missed any questions. Doesn't look like it. So let's commit that as well. Show depicted item IDs. But of course, this is not all that useful because what we would like to see is really the labels of them. So like we see here, cue ball, Megan, black hat, Danish. And so we want to get the labels of these item IDs from the API. And this is the point where it is really better to use the API, because if we wanted to do this with the linked data interface with /entity like we did earlier, then we would have to make 4 network requests now. And with the API, we can do this in 1 network request. We can say labels response API session get. The action will still be wget entities, but this time we pass in all the depicted item IDs, and we say this time we're interested in the labels. Is it label or labels? I don't remember. It is labels, okay. And we will for now only be interested in the English labels and with language fallback. So we have props labels actually. Right. Yeah, labels, languages is English for now. Language fallback is true. And then let's return this labels response, just so we can look at it in the browser. And we should see, yeah, we see these 4 different entities all in 1 network request and response with their English labels and nothing else that we didn't ask for, except, okay, there's the ID and there's the type, which we didn't ask for. I'm not sure why it's including those. But otherwise, we have only the little information we need, which is nice. So we can now collect the labels as a dict, a map, and for entity in labels response, or for, let's call it item, entities values, I think that should work. For each of the values in there, we want to set actually item ID we need a different variable name so we don't reuse the item ID up here. Fine, let's call it entity ID entity. And then dot item, so we iterate over the key and the value. And then in labels, entity ID, we put the entity labels en, and then the value of that. And then we have these labels and can pass those into here as well. And then we should be able to get the labels keyed with the item ID. And there we go. Now we have the labels of the characters. Yeah, with one API call, in theory, there's an issue here to do split if more than 50 depicted item IDs. So if we ask the API for over 50 IDs at a time, then it will yell at us, I think. Right, the limit is 50. Yeah, maximum number of values is 50. 500 for clients allowed higher limits, but we're not even logged in, so we definitely don't have any higher limits. So if there's an XKCD comic out there that has more than 50 characters in it on Wikidata, then this breaks. Our current code breaks, but for now, let's not worry about that. And I think there's at least one XKCD comic that depicts more than 50 characters, but I'm pretty sure it's not actually modeled in Wikidata, so we're probably safe for now. So I'll just leave it at this to-do comment. Yeah, add labels of depicted characters. Okay. And we might actually get to the to-do towards the end. What time is it? Okay, just half past. Are there any questions right now, or should I continue? Because this is actually a pretty good halfway point. What we've done so far is get the data of one item. We've done it through the linked data interface or through the API. And the next step would be to use a query to get all the XKCD comics that show, for instance, Danish. So I'll just start writing that query in Sparkle while we wait for any questions. So that would be, we want the comic, yeah, just a comic, I think, where the comic is part of XKCD and the comic depicts, let's say, Danish, this character. This one, the one from XKCD. And we get 15 results back, so that sounds like a nice item to test with. And to make this Sparkle query, I'm just going to do the same thing I did for getting the data of one item, which is I'm first going to use the requests library to not use any extra library, and then I'm going to switch to using an extra library just to show both of the versions, I guess. So this will definitely be a new endpoint. Def character, which will be rooted at character slash, and we'll do the same trick again, int ID, where we put the q outside of the ID so that we can assert here that it's an integer, and then item ID equals q ID. And we'll return render template character HTML item ID, and copy the index to character HTML. Comics featuring item ID, just to see that this works. Let's make this a new tab with, what was the item ID for Danish, for instance? This one, character. There we go. So that's the very basic HTML again. And now we want to send this query. So we need to construct the query for that. Or let's call it the Sparkle. No, let's call it the query actually. Let's do it as one of these multi-line string literals and indent the whole thing correctly. And here, instead of hard-coding the ID, we will put %s and then put item ID format it into it afterwards. And just quickly return the query to see that it looks correct. Yep, that looks like the query we want to send. Yeah, that's just what we discussed in the Sparkle session earlier as well. And now we want to send that query, so we will it's called result requests session. So it's our general HTTP client .get query Wikidata org Sparkle with args, I think it's called. Query. I think actually Python doesn't want spaces there. And then we return the result instead. Oh, and we'll want .json again. And you will remember when we're talking to the query service, we're still using the same request session, which means we're still using our user agent to tell the query service who we are. And this also means that we will actually get JSON back and not some other weird format. And damn it. Okay, so it's not called args. It's called, what's it called? Help request session get. Nah, it doesn't work. Then I need to cheat and look at the code that I wrote yesterday. No, I don't remember. Linked data fragments endpoint. Okay. That's also in the way. Let's just look. Python requests docs. This one. That has a quick start, doesn't it? Needs JavaScript, of course. Quick start, there it is. Data? No, we don't want to post. Params. Okay, it's called params, not args. Fine. There we go. Okay. So we have a query result with a bunch of bindings here, which we want to iterate over. So let's call that the comic item IDs, just like we had the depicted item IDs up there. Now that's the comic item IDs. They start as an empty list, and for binding in results bindings, we have the comic URI is binding comic value, and the comic item ID is comic URI replace or no, let's do assert comic URI starts with Wikidata org/entity/ and then the comic item ID is the comic URI starting at the length of this string, and comic item IDs append the comic item ID, and then let's return the comic item IDs. There they are. Okay, that works. And now we can put that in here. Comic item IDs. And we can add here, just like in comic HTML, list for depicted item ID. Replace that with comic. And we replace the label part because we don't have labels yet. And now we should see this. And we could now grab one of these item IDs and put it back here. And we have a different comic featuring also the Danish character. Okay, so let's commit this again. Add character page. No labels yet. And before we move on to showing labels of the comics, I think we should again replace this HTTP code with a custom library to make the Sparkle query. And in this case, I don't think in this code that's going to have any particular benefits, but I guess it's a bit nicer to do. So the Query Service UI actually suggests code for us. If we run this query, there's this button with code here. And if we look at its suggestion for Python, it says we could use this Sparkle wrapper library. So let's do that. I'm not going to exactly use this code, but we can do something similar. So let's add that to the requirements, Sparkle wrapper. There we go, that's installed with rdflib. And we import the Sparkle wrapper library and create a Sparkle session is a Sparkle wrapper.Sparkle wrapper. How do you create it? Yeah, with the endpoint URL, which we're just going to hardcode, query wikidata org Sparkle, and the agent equals user agent. And also we will set the return format to JSON. So Sparkle session.set return format Sparkle wrapper.json. And then down here we can Sparkle session.set query, this method, and result equals Sparkle session dot query dot convert. And that should work exactly the same way. Let's check. There it is. Okay. And commit that as well. Use Sparkle wrapper library for Sparkle query. I'm not 100% sure what the benefits of using this library are. Since it wasn't that more complicated to not use the library. It probably has a bunch of features that I'm just not all that familiar with. I know it's definitely integrated with the whole rdflib kind of ecosystem, which I'm not going to use in this case. It helps in... Oh yeah, right. I think it actually has something like return formats, automatic conversion of the results, partial interpretation of the results. I think you could use it to automatically convert the results in some way. I just haven't used that feature. I think one thing it might do is, what does it say here? Okay, no, it doesn't do it automatically. I thought it might switch from get to post automatically when the query gets too long, but it looks like it doesn't do that yet. Yeah, in this case, it's more to me like that using a library seems like the better thing to do because there are probably complications I haven't thought of. But yeah, I can't point to any specific benefits of this right now. What we should definitely do is cross-link between these endpoints. So instead of just linking to or just dumping the item ID here, we should make it a link back to the page for this comic. So, and to do that, we can use the Flask function UL for comic with the ID being So we specify this now, and we have to remove the Q from the item ID. So that will be the comic item ID starting. So after removing one character. And then this should correctly link to the comic page. Let's take a look. Oh, right. This still needs to be wrapped in braces. Yeah, and we can see this one. I think this is the car problems. Yeah. And now in car problems, we would like to link the characters. So in comics, we will make something similar and say that this links to the URL for character, where the ID is again the depicted item ID after removing the first Q character. And now we can reload this and see the link to Danish. And now this works and we can follow these links back and forth. Link between comic and character pages. And I think the last thing I would do now is to add the labels of all the items in here, of all the comics. And here we will actually run, so we could actually do this two ways. We could either get the labels from the query, or we could make separate API requests. And then use this as an opportunity to fix this to-do here as well. And I think I'm actually going to make it as API requests because we also need the label for this item ID. So I will extract that into a separate function, labels item IDs. Where we have, or let's call this get labels. I should also have pushed this, I just remembered. And the labels start out as an empty dict, and we copy all of this code. Turn on labels. And then down here we use labels, get labels of the depicted item IDs. And here we can also use labels, get labels of the item ID plus all the comic item IDs. And then we pass that in here, labels, labels, and use that here as labels. Hang on, labels. That needs to be inside the curly braces, not outside. And do the same thing here. Oops. Did I copy something badly? Yeah, this needs to be just item IDs, not depicted item IDs. There we go. So now we can see the titles of all the comics. We still have the to-do. I'll commit this. Add labels to character comic listing. And for this last bit of making several API calls, this is something that would be much nicer in JavaScript, and in Python there's just some pattern I know that's fairly ugly for chunk in what was it? Item IDs of I to I plus 50 for I in range 0 len item IDs in steps of 50, I think. And we call this the chunk, remove the to-do, and do all this in the loop. And I think that's how this code goes, but last time I just copy pasted it from somewhere else, so let's try it. Okay, it seems to work. And now we should also be able to do the same thing with cue ball. Which takes a little bit because cue ball is probably featured in well over 1,000 comics. But there we go. Now we have all of these comics featuring cue ball, and previously we would have just gotten an error from the API because we can't ask for 1,000 labels at once. So request labels in batches of 50 items. The API won't allow more at once. And let's just quickly check that. Check out the parent commit. And now we should get an error. Yeah, there we go. Oh. Okay, that's not the error I expected. This is an error that we are requesting so many items that it doesn't fit into the into a URL. Let's try it with a slightly different character. Black hat should be in more than 50 comics. There we go. So now we get an API error, too many values supplied for parameter IDs. The limit is 50, and because we have this nice debugger, we could check here actually len item IDs. How many did we ask for? We asked for 117. That's too much. So that's why we go to this commit where we split it into chunks of 50 with this not great code, but it works at least. So let's push that. And with that, I think I've reached the end of the ideas I had for this. It's a very simple web app, but it gets some data from another web source, XKCD. It gets some data for a single item from Wikidata, and it runs a Sparkle query as well, a very simple Sparkle query. And yeah, I hope this was at least vaguely useful. And unless there are any questions, I think this also seems like a good time to end. We are almost exactly at the... I don't remember if this was announced to be 50 minutes or 60 minutes, but we're slightly over 50 minutes, so that seems like a good time, I guess. Yeah. What should Randall change if he wanted to use this on his web page? Probably at least improve the styling of this. So what I usually have for all of my ToolForge tools, if you've ever noticed, they all look basically similar, like positions, toolforge.org. They all have this nav bar at the top with the tool name and then documentation, ToolForge source code. That's because I always generate this with cookie cutter ToolForge, which you are very welcome to use as well. And then that has here in the templates a base template with this thing that I left out, UTF-8 and Bootstrap, and then some basic styling for Bootstrap. So this is the kind of thing you would like to add, which I left out here just to keep it even simpler. And add caching seems like a good idea. Also, overall, it might be smarter to get the labels of the comics with the Sparkle query instead of making, in this case, probably dozens of API requests and letting the user wait in the background. It would probably be more efficient in this case to... Let's just try it out. So we want all the comics depicting cue ball, and we want also the comic label. The query takes 1.5 seconds. Yeah, so this would definitely be faster in this case. Yeah. And you could, again, build something similar in this Wixibit. Do I still have the link where I tried this earlier? Wait, that was on the different laptop. I can send myself the link, I think. 1 second. This link, copy link. So in this code pen, yes, you may have JavaScript, fine. We also have the car problems comic, where so in this case, the item ID is specified here, and then I said I had the source link. Oh, that's actually not in here yet. And then also the list of depicts. And in this Wikidata, that's as simple as putting property depicts env multiple, and then inside span property label, and that's how it gets the label of all of these. And so that's definitely easy to work with. I'm not sure if this thing could have also done the Sparkle query part. I think maybe it could have. Yeah, actually, they demonstrated something like this, where it was searching for items. What I'm less sure about is if it would be possible to get this XKCD JSON and to get the image URL from there. But yeah, definitely you would want to look at this Wikidata as well, which looked very promising. This reads from a file. Let's look at this. And also, thanks for pasting the code pen that I forgot to paste. Okay, yeah. It's not showing for me for some reason. But yeah, it looks like that's also something that would work. Okay, so that's definitely an alternative approach, I guess. I think that's all the things I can think of as things Randall should change to use this. All right, I think we can end it here. And I think this was the last session, right? So I hope you enjoyed the first day of the Data Reuse Days, unless Manuel or Lydia want to do the farewell. I can stop sharing the screen at least and show you the webcam maybe again. So yeah, I hope this was useful. I think, as far as I remember, I was the only one talking, so I think there should be no problem putting the recording somewhere. YouTube, comments, I don't know. We'll figure something out. Yeah, and I already uploaded this code, right? Did I do a last push? Yeah, so that is here, and I'm not sure if I'll deploy this anywhere, but you're free to take a look at that. And yeah, have a nice evening and see you tomorrow for the rest of the Data Reuse Days, I guess. Bye.